let's talk about levelling up, shall we? Have you seen today that round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund has been announced? Did your area get any? If you're sitting there saying, I don't know, Michelle, well, you can look it up. I've seen a little guide today online. You can literally put your town, your city in, and it'll share with you exactly what you've got, what it's going into, and who else has got what. The pot today is basically going to be shared among 111 communities. I've got to say, though, it's really divided opinion, Daniel, because people are kind of saying, why has London got any? Why has the South East got any? It's supposed to be just about the North, etc. What did you think about the distribution of this Levelling Up Fund?
Well, it wasn't ever meant to be just about the North, because there are lots of really left-behind places all around the place, including, for example, lots of our traditional coastal towns, former tourist towns that are now really on their backs, and they're not all in the north of England by any means. So it was never intended, in my view, to be, and I had something to do with this myself, actually, because this was a Boris idea, and it was based on something we did in London, and it was the idea that you actually empower communities. This is very important. This isn't just a question of giving money out, although I must admit the government sounds as though it's lost the plot a bit on the messaging. It's about saying to communities, what is it you'd like to have, if you had some extra money, what would you like to spend it on? Is it your high street? Is it improving your high street? Is it doing this? Is it helping with a bypass? What might it be? Give us those bids, we'll look at them, and if they're not totally mad, we'll do our best to fund them. Of course, you get more bids than you can afford, and you hand out the money. So it's meant to be as much as anything about empowering people. You know what annoys me, though, Michelle, is that when I was doing transport in London, I was the deputy chairman of Transport for London under Boris, and I was doing that. I always had these mad leftists from the north saying London gets more spent per head on transport than we do up here. And the moment Rishi Sunak comes out on telly and says we're spending more per head on this fund, from this fund, on people in the north, they all shout at him and say, we're not interested in per head anymore, we're talking about per acre. We want so much per region. And they want to change the rules of the game again. People are what matter, not the empty acres in between them. And if you're getting more per head, that's what really counts. And that's what I think people...
I want to come back to you in a second about the actual process. You referenced the bids and all the rest of it. That's been criticised a lot, the actual process. But I'll just come back to that in a second.
By people who haven't got money, it's been criticised, and I understand that.
Well, no, it's broader than that. The actual process involved, the time, the resource involved in actually constructing a bid. It's a huge waste of resource for many people, so I'll come back to that in a second. But, Aaron, where do you stand on it?
Well, I agree in terms of some of the initial points there made around who it's been awarded to. You had some people on the left say, oh, it's a fix. You know, Rishi Sunak's constituency got so much money, but it was actually less than 1%. People said, well, the South East has got twice as much as Yorkshire. Well, the South East population is almost twice as much as Yorkshire. So I don't buy those criticisms. Where I think it falls short is just actually, I agree the process is limited, especially if your bid fails. All that, like you say, resource and time has been put into it for nothing, and that's to the detriment of local constituents and taxpayers. And then secondly, I just think the sums involved are so low. So, for instance, you saw in Cardiff, connecting Cardiff Bay with Cardiff Central train station, 30 million. Or connecting the 4 biggest urban areas in Cornwall, I think 40 million. And you think, this is such low-hanging fruit. Of course, it's a lot of money, but in terms of the country, and in terms of how little these areas, particularly somewhere like Cornwall, see from central government, you think, why didn't this happen 10, 15 years ago?
I do have to say, I agree with that. I mean, my City Hall, they put 2 bids in. Neither of them were successful, but we did get some 19 million, I think it was, in the first tranche. That whole process, there's something, it almost feels a little bit degrading that all of these councils around the country have to kind of, you know, please, sir, pick me, look at my wonderful bid sheet. And it's brought about, or it's re-energised a conversation, Daniel, about devolution and about why should it be that central government, or Westminster, whatever you want to call it, Westminster is this all kind of powerful being that your towns, your cities and all the rest of it have
to explain.
Go on then.
This idea of bidding, by the way, goes back to Michael Heseltine in the 1990s. Yeah, in the 1990s, and I think it was called City Challenge at that stage, but I say it's closely related to the idea of empowerment, because you could have somebody in Whitehall saying, we've decided what you need in your local community, and we're going to pay for it. But to have people bid, remember, these bids should be, if it's done properly, should be coming around every year. And a bid you've prepared this year, which wasn't successful, is one that you can work on and refurbish next year. in the hope of getting something at much less cost. So you've still got it in the drawer.
But who makes the decision?
Well, it's going to be made centrally.
Exactly.
It's made fundamentally by the minister. So they come to the question
who probably has never even visited half these places.
Why is it made in the centre? Why is it not made locally? And the answer to that is very, very simple. You could have full fiscal devolution in this country, if you wanted, on the basis of people paying for things locally, except that you would end up with huge inequalities because the tax base locally is going to be very, very different from one place to another. And you're always going to have to redistribute and top it up hugely, taking money away. What happens is large amounts of money are taken away from London and places like that through the taxation system. Before COVID, I know I'm out of date, but before COVID the figure was about 13 billion a year, and redistributed through the tax and grant system to other parts of the country. If you didn't, and that gives the government, which is doing the redistribution, a huge amount of say, inevitably, in how money is spent, which they'll never ever be able to walk away from. You will never get a government minister who will say, yeah, I gave 50 million quid to Hull. I've no idea how they're spending it. I'm not doing any checks. I'm not keeping any control. They'll never get them to say that. And they'd be monstered in the House of Commons if they tried to do something like that, because they remain accountable for the money. So it's the inequality of resources that requiring redistribution which places government right at the centre of this, and always will, as long as you want that redistribution.
What do you think about these calls for more devolution? People are saying, like, for example, you've got your mayors like your Andy Burnhams, give these guys more power rather than this whole kind of cap doffing, this begging bowl to Westminster.
Well, I think we saw it with Brexit, but England outside of Greater London, outside the South East, is just politically invisible. And I think that's why when Andy Burnham came to the fore with the COVID sort of crisis, people went, wow, this is a politician who isn't in London, who's really visible and saying things I agree with, and we don't have enough of that in this country. So, for instance, I'm from the South Coast. I was born in Bournemouth. I live in Portsmouth. I find it surreal that in South Hampshire, you have 1.5 million people living there. We don't have a city mayor or a metro mayor, and yet you do have them in Liverpool, Manchester, other parts of the country. So this hodgepodge, this mishmash of devolution in England, I think is a real mess, and I think this is a piece with that, really, in so much as there isn't a coherent, structured plan about how to reinvigorate England, both in terms of its politics and accountability and local political figureheads, and in terms of its sort of economy. It is, I should say, reading the projects it makes you really enthusiastic, really optimistic. You say, great things are happening in places which nobody talks about, which are really unfashionable. And I think that's brilliant. But I think the manner in which it's happened and the fact that this is almost an afterthought, I mean, 2 billion, you know, we should be giving so much more money to these places. These places are the backbone of the country. Derby, Blackpool, Southampton, Bangor, Dundee. Unfashionable. The political class don't want to talk about them. They make Britain what it is.
Yeah, and the Levelling Up Fund, by the way, it was about 4 billion. So you've had your first round level, or whatever you want to call it, in 2021. Today you've got this round, and then I think there'll be a third round as well. So this isn't the end. So if a city or a town or whatever missed out on that fund, it doesn't mean that that is the full stop. You can still get that money. For me, levelling up, you've got to get better jobs into some of these places.
Yeah.
You've got to start giving decent employment opportunities, because all the time that you have towns and cities where the brightest people leave that town and city for employment opportunities in London or thereabouts, how can that town and city recover if all you give them is, I don't know, low-paid factory work or whatever? I don't know if there's enough focus put into.
Some of that's reversing, but not necessarily back to where people came from. So a lot of people who've come to London, you know, it's a sort of story now, isn't it? A lot of young people who come to London get to a certain stage in life, get married, start to have children, need to move out, and are moving to places like Bath, Bristol, places like that, and so on. So you're getting a flow going the other way, but it's not necessarily going back up to the north or where they might have originated.
Yeah.
So it's not all London sucks it all in and people stay.
That's absolutely true, yeah.
There's a lot of two-way flow in this.
True.
I agree with you entirely about jobs. Where I don't agree with Aaron, you see, is that you're going to... And I said this in the House of Lords only on Tuesday, where we had the Levelling Up Bill had second reading, and I said... a lot of the stuff you're doing here is the stale old agenda of creating city mayors and moving about different layers of local government. That isn't empowering people. That isn't what they want. They want empowerment.
That's not true.
Than another layer of local
That isn't
government.
true. Once you have a
so having a mayor for Hampshire is not
Let him
going to make
respond,
a big
because
difference.
he's-
Well, that's what I know. We know that once, for instance, there is a metro mayor or a city mayor in something like Liverpool, Manchester, London, once it happens, they're hugely popular. That's just a fact. The polling supports that.
Well, would you support that? Has your town, city or whatever got a mayor? Do you want one? I mean, people, I've got messages here about Sadiq Khan. People are saying Sadiq Khan is supposed to be levelling up. He's levelling down. I think some people would offer him up if you want a mayor. You don't have one. I think people are offering. You can have Sadiq Khan if you want one. Would you want him? I don't know. Get in touch. GBviews at gbnews.uk.